Ani Kenawea. Hello, everyone. Bonjour tout le monde. Matthew Indigenous STEM. My name is Matthew. Monosi Matthew. I work at Science North. I am a staff scientist and have been working with the Indigenous Ingenuity exhibit that came to us from the Montreal Science Centre. And Nungo, today I am very, very excited to bring you another excellent presentation. And so today, what we have is a special presentation on Indigenous and Anishinaabe STEM or STEM from historical perspectives to modern day. And so this is in conjunction with as well Treaty Recognition Week. And so this week for the province of Ontario, this Treaty Recognition Week is an important week as we are all treaty people. And so it is important to recognize that we live on treaty lands and that also we are all treaty members. And so it is important to acknowledge, learn, and become active participants in the ongoing treaty process. And with that being said, I would like to acknowledge that Science North and Dynamic Earth are situated on the traditional and ancestral lands of the Miccosing Anishinaabe, as well as the Wampum First Nation. And with this said, I don't want to take too much time. I want to introduce to you our special guest, Dominic Beaudry. And Dominic is an Anishinaabe educator for over 2 decades. He resides in Wickwimicong in Minnesing on Manitoulin Island. And he's a long-standing member on our Indigenous Advisory Committee at Science North. So without further ado, I would like to introduce to you Dominic Beaudry.
Ani, Minigajep, Bichinadam Kinam Guk, Bungi Shas getting a Kedabata, Nagabaju, Evak and Anishinaabe King, Abjugunishin, Nidabachiga Dekmanda, Science North Gay, Nadamaget, Abjugani Mami Quendam. Good morning to you all. My name is Dominic Beaudry. I'm Odawa Anishinaabe from Comiccon First Nation. This morning I'm going to talk about Anishinaabe, science, technology, engineering, and math, or we can call it Indigenous STEM. So I look forward to the presentation. Okay, so Matthew, if you wanted to share my slideshow, you can commence that. Okay, so this morning I wanted to talk about Indigenous STEM, Anishinaabe use of science, technology, engineering, and math, Anishinaabe contribution in Indigenous STEM, early Canada to the modern period, whereas Science North has been kind of promoting it from Canoes to NASA. Before we get started, I just wanted to talk about why it's important for us to learn about this, because we need to bring First Nations people into a modern context. Because a lot of times when we look at First Nations in our classrooms, we kind of look at them as hunter-gatherer societies or people from a long time ago kind of stuck in time. But we want to share some of the contributions of Anishinaabe people from the beginning of time, from centuries ago, right to the contact period, and kind of like in a modern context, how we see them in a modern world today. Because I believe there's many contributions to STEM, and Indigenous people have been contributing to STEM from the very beginning, and I just want to share some of those contributions. Okay, so I'm going to start generally looking at agriculture. So many of us, we tend to think First Nations people, they pick berries, blueberries, strawberries, they pick wild food, wild rice, that sort of thing. But many people don't really know that Anishinaabe people have been growing agricultural produce before the Europeans arrived. They've been growing corn, beans, and squash. So we also talk about stewardship on when we're planting food or when we're harvesting food. We do it in ways where we protect the soil, we protect the environment. So this screen here shows the three sisters. Many of you may have heard of the three sisters, which are corn, beans, and squash. So when we talk about stewardship and growing plants responsibly, so this is plant science, so botany. So looking at soil, cultivation, and agriculture. So the three sisters, they were grown together for very specific reasons. First of all, these foods here are very nutritious. They provide us with carbohydrates, proteins, and vitamins and minerals. So these are complete foods. So when we look at corn, when you grow corn with beans and squash, the corn grows in long stalks. So the corn kind of acts as a trellis. So a trellis is kind of like, people use a stick in order to allow beans or some type of plant to grow off the ground. So the corn is grown first and it acts as a trellis. The corn stalk will pull the bean up off the ground. And they also grew the bean with the corn and the squash for a specific reason, because not only are beans full of protein, it's a natural protein, so you don't necessarily have to eat meat to get your protein. You can get your protein from beans. So beans also create something called nitrogen fixation, which is extremely healthy for the soil. So when I talked earlier about stewardship, it's important to look at why these plants are grown together. So when we look at the squash plant, squash prevents weed growth and promotes soil moisture. And some squash have these prickly vines and leaves on them, so it prevents animals or wildlife from getting at the food before it's ready to be picked by folks that are growing it. So I just wanted to talk about plant science and how important that is. So the other thing we need to understand is corn, beans, and squash are indigenous food from Turtle Island, from North America, from the Americas. So corn, beans, and squash were never seen in Europe or Western Europe or anywhere else in the world. So these are gifts from indigenous people to the world. You can move to the next slide, please. Another gift is the potato. So many of us don't think too much about the food we eat, but something as simple as the potato, that's a plant science too. So what I mean by that is the potato has been grown throughout the Americas, from South America, Central America, to North America, and in the Great Lakes region. So there are more than 4,000 varieties of potatoes found in the Americas. It is actually the third most important crop in the world after wheat and rice. And the source is CIP International Potato Center. So even when we look at something as simple as the potato, this is a gift from indigenous botanists. So again, the potato is found nowhere else in the world except for the Americas. And when we look at history, some of you will cover history, social science, for the younger grades and the older grades, history. So we may have heard of the Irish potato famine. So the Anishinaabe people introduced the potato, and potato was introduced to the newcomers, and they took this potato to Western Europe. In a very short period of time, it became a very important crop in Western Europe. And we have to remember, it's an indigenous plant from the Americas. So they became so reliant upon it. When there was crop failure, they had something called the Irish potato famine. So another thing we need to remember when we look at indigenous botany or plants or indigenous food is that we have to respect and honor indigenous knowledge. So what happened was the Europeans only took 1 or 2 varieties of potato rather than a dozen or 20 varieties. So when one or two of those varieties failed, they had an Irish potato famine. So you need to respect indigenous knowledge. They should have taken more varieties. As it says here, there's over 4,000 varieties of potatoes. So again, with corn, beans, and squash, potatoes, and there's other plants, tomatoes, all different varieties of foods that we eat today. They say about 60 to 65% of the food that we consume today is indigenous food from the Americas, from Turtle Island. So we don't really look at food history, but we should, because it's important to know the contributions of Indigenous people, of Anishinaabe people, to the world that we live in. Without their Indigenous food science, we would have very few varieties of food. Okay, so these crops now are anywhere in the world you can go, you see Indigenous crops from the Americas. Indigenous science from the Americas was spread throughout the world. It's important to share that. So when we talk about STEM, plant science is very important. Next slide, please. This is a ceramic coil. This is an Anishinaabe coil ceramic pottery used for cooking, storing food, and processing maple sugar. So this is from 500 BC, and you can see this online at the Canadian Museum of History. It's CAG 1-1.1 if you wanted to take a look at it sometime, or you could just Google it online. So Anishinaabe coiled ceramic pottery is when you create clay formation, and you make a long stringy clay, and then you put it in a circle, piling it on top of one another. Then you make a container out of it, and then you smooth it out. So over time, it hardens up. Then you kind of like manipulate it, and that becomes a vessel for storing food, for cooking food, and for processing. So First Nations chief recently asked me, in their community, the word Wabakik was a surname from the past. And they asked me, what does Wabakik mean? So when you look at the word Wabakik, our word for clay is Wabagun. And our word for a pot or a bowl is kik. And the word ke is to make. So the word Wabakik is literally pottery maker in the Ojibwe Anishinaabe language. Wabakik is a pottery maker. So the Anishinaabe have been involved in making pottery for a very, very long time. And it was one of the ways how they used to process all that food that I showed earlier, corn, beans, and squash, potatoes, tomatoes, that sort of thing. So the Anishinaabe had their own cooking pots and pottery. Mind you, after contact, they began to use metal pots and use metal containers and such. But pottery and ceramics were very, very important during the contact period. In fact, many of the settlers used Ojibwe and Anishinaabe pottery when they first arrived as well. So looking at pottery is extremely important. There was a vessel found near Deep River, Ontario, a huge pot. And the vessel was about 70 liters deep. So one could imagine a 2-liter bottle of Pepsi or Coke or a drink. This was 70 liters. So they did a lot of cooking. They did a lot of storing. And some of the pottery, some of the pots were extremely, extremely huge. So we need to learn about, if we're going to learn about Anishinaabe people, about First Nations people, we can't just focus on hunter-gatherer societies. We need to focus on how they grew their agriculture, how they processed their agriculture, how they cooked their food, how they stored their food. Those are all important things to remember when we look at First Nations people. Okay, especially during Treaty Recognition Week, we need to get a better understanding of who First Nations people are. How did they live off the land, and what gifts did they provide to the rest of Ontario, to the rest of Canada? So those are all very important. So next slide, please. So this is the Northeastern Native American Birchbark Canoe. And if you go to Science North, you'll see a Birchbark Canoe hanging from the ceiling in the back there. I think they may have moved it out front, but it's a really, really nice Anishinaabe object to see, ways on how they used to travel. So you can see the different sections of this canoe, from the rawhide lacing to the black spruce roots that they used, the white pine gum, the different sections, the top plate, the outwale, the gunwale, the cedar planking, the forks, okay, and the prow piece. So Anishinaabe people created these canoes using birch bark And centuries ago, the birch bark trees were massive trees, not like you see the small trees today. The trees back then were massive, so you could cut out a single sheet and literally create a huge canoe. So here it says there was canoes that were 6 to 7 feet. This one here is labeled at 12 feet, but I'll show you a picture later where they're a lot longer than 12 feet as well, where they could hold at least eight or more people. So the Anishinaabe people were quite proficient in creating birch bark canoes. And we have to remember, during the early contact period, the settler period, there was no planes, trains, or automobiles. So this was your mode, primary mode of travel up and down the river systems, the creeks, the waters, the lakes. And Anishinaabe also used something called Mackinac boats, where they provided a sail when they went across the larger waters, across the larger lakes. So this is what you would call a birch bark canoe. Today, we're seeing a resurgence in these. I've seen online, one was recently built on Manitoulin Island at Kenjigewan Tech, and as well as the comiccon High School in comiccon, Ontario. Students were involved in creating a canoe there as well. So it's very important to share this information, because during the contact period, there was massive warehouses. One was found in Gore Bay, Ontario, when they were creating a subdivision or creating houses. They found the remnants of a huge longhouse or a type of warehouse. And it turns out that they may have been producing birch bark canoes there for the fur trade industry, during the fur trade era in Upper and Lower Canada. So Ontario and Quebec. We can move to the next slide, please. So Sheboygan, there's a place in Michigan called Sheboygan, Michigan. So Sheboygan or Jebwagan literally means Ojibwe canoe paddle. So Ojibwe canoe paddles were made from ash, maple trees, cedar and pine, used for lightweight paddling. So again, they had all these different varieties of birch bark canoes. Some of them were made for leisure travel. Some of them were made for industry, to transport furs during the fur trade industry, and to transport and for portaging. So there's a variety of different types of birch bark canoes that were created. So when you look at all those complex processes, we call that science. If you could go back to the previous screen, please. So when you look at something as simple as a birch bark canoe, there's a lot of science involved in this. Okay, what type of birch bark are you going to use? What thickness? What type of adhesive and glue and spruce gum are you going to use? This is technology, kind of like today where folks are building automobiles for transportation. Well, this was their form of transportation back then, so it's a technology. The engineering involved to heat the wood and to soak the wood and to bend it, that's engineering. And the mathematics involved in spacing the ribs for the boat. So when you look at science, technology, engineering, and math, this is a very good example of how all those different ways of looking at science and technology, engineering, math can be incorporated. Next slide, please. So these are the different types of paddles. So some of them were extremely lightweight, and those are for leisure, short travel. Some of them were extremely heavy for portaging and carrying industry material like fur or like maple sugar, or different varieties of economic trade items that they would have on their canoes. So that's what these different types of paddles were used for. Again, the Anishinaabe people were quite knowledgeable in terms of deciding what type of wood you're going to use. So you're not going to use a wood that's going to break easily. That could be problematic when you're out on the big water. You're going to use a wood that's going to be resilient and something that you could rely on. Okay? So that's really important when we're looking at travel during the contact period and travel amongst the First Nations in the earlier periods. And this is just another example of showing how folks use the natural materials that were found in the environment. Next slide, please. So Matthew, you can hear me okay? Okay. Next slide, please. Go back. Go back one more. Okay, so that's so those are the canoe paddles, the paddles used in the water. Next slide, please. So this is a picture of a canoe race, Manitoulin to Killarney. So I juxtaposed the two images. One image is from a very long time ago on the top. It's a picture of canoe with 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, 6, 7, 8 folks on that canoe. And below that canoe is a picture of Mitsubishi. Okay, it's a water serpent. So a lot of times, kind of like when you're driving along the highway, you would see a stop sign. You could see a sign that says Toronto, 400 kilometers away. So a lot of times on the side of rocks, they would use red ochre paintings, and they would let folks know. So for instance, if this image was seen in Lake Superior, it would say the waters here are extremely rough. So the Mitsubishi on the bottom in red ochre is shown as the water can be extremely rough. So the Ojibwe tend to talk about stories about Mitsubishi when the waters are really stirring up and it's extremely windy outside. So this image would indicate if you're going to travel Lake Superior and the waters are rough, you should at least have 8 people in your canoe, because you need a lot of manpower, a lot of horsepower to move along these waters when it's really rough, right? So that's kind of like our street signs from a long, long time ago. And also they hold historical significance, and some of them hold spiritual significance, those red ochre drawings that you see along the side of rocks when you're out on the water in the Great Lakes region. The picture you see below is a canoe, again, with 8 people on it. So the reason why I included this picture here is because this canoe was constructed and fabricated by Anishinaabe students at the Comiccon High School. So it was one of their projects for one of their courses to fabricate and construct a canoe. And their summative project was to make sure that it floats, to make sure that you can use it traveling out on the water. They did such a efficient and great job at constructing this canoe. It was entered into a canoe race that they have from Little Current, Ontario to Killarney. So initially the students were going to enter the canoe race themselves, but race regulations wouldn't allow for students to be entered due to insurance purposes and whatnot. So instead, some of the classroom teachers, that's my son there, I believe. He's the 4th one from the front. That's my son Cameron, as well as the chief is, I think, two persons behind him, and some counselors. So they ended up canoeing from Little Current, Manitoulin to Killarney in a race, and they did extremely well. So this is the canoe that was constructed and fabricated by students in Comiccon. So we're seeing quite a resurgence of students becoming involved in creating traditional type canoes. That way they get a better understanding of how folks used to travel in the past and how they would construct these important vessels. So again, I'm just showing this here to let you know there's a image from way in the past, centuries and centuries ago, to an image from, I do believe, from 2019. So our culture is not stuck in the past. Our culture is in the present, and canoes can be used for many purposes today. Recreation is a big component. Folks for tourism, folks vacationing. Everybody loves being out on the water, and flying the waters of Manitoulin during vacation time is one the very important traditions that we see here on Manitoulin Island. So I just wanted to share that. Again, Anishinaabe people are not stuck in time, as it shows in that image on the top, but they're here with us today, and they're actively engaged in their culture, and they're actively engaged in these exciting races that we have now on Manitoulin Island. Next slide, please. This is the Minjikening Fishware, a national historic site at Lake Simcoe in Couchiching. So we talked earlier about agriculture and how First Nations were involved in growing corn, beans, squash, potatoes, tomatoes, and that sort of thing. But most of the First Nations lived on islands or near water. And most of the First Nations that lived on the water or by the water took full advantage of their landscape, took advantage of the waterways. So this site here is now a National Historic Site, and it's still there today. So again, I juxtaposed the top image, a sketch from thousands of years ago, to a photograph that was recently taken. So the Minjikening Fishwares are still there. Interestingly, this was built 2,500 years ago. So they took a piece of wood that was under the water. Some of it is showing on the surface as well. And they examined how old the wood was and how old the fishwares were. And they indicated it was 2,500 BC. Interestingly, some of us that study ancient civilizations or look going back in history, the pyramids in Egypt were constructed during the same time period, 2,500 BC, over 4,500 years ago. So the Anishinaabe people were involved in creating these massive fishwares. And when you look at this type of picture, you can imagine the science, the technology, the engineering, and the math that went into constructing this. So it's a really interesting site, and it provides us a glimpse on how the Anishinaabe people used to live. So they were not only agriculturalists, but they were also involved in what looks like a massive fishing industry as well. So they're capturing all these fish. So you can see these cages, 1, 2, 3, 4. There's 4 cages there where they're capturing fish. And then when we look at stewardship, they're using math to ensure that the little fish escape through the fence. So Minjikening in our language literally means fish fence or underwater fish fence. So today, in a modern context, I had relatives that were recently involved in fish farming. So fish farming and fishing activities have been with us for over 4,000 years, 4,500 years. So as we see, we're not just hunter-gatherer societies. This is not hunting and gathering. This is complex engineering. This is STEM, 4,500 years ago. So that's who First Nations people were. They weren't stuck in time. They were involved in complex economic activities for their time period. Okay. Next slide, please. So when we travel, we talked a little bit about transportation earlier. In the winter months, of course, you can't canoe from place to place, but you could travel by snowshoe. And those of you that are from Northern Ontario, you try to walk through a forested area after heavy snowfall. You will not go very far. However, if you strap a snowshoe to your feet, these are traditional snowshoes, by the way, that are centuries old. The type of snowshoes we see today are made out of plastics and aluminum, but these are traditional snowshoes. So when it snows really lots, like in Northern Ontario, you don't go very far. But if you strap these to your feet, then you can get around quite easily, because these allow you to stay above the snow. So they create like a buoyancy factor where you can traverse around the snow and not have to worry about getting stuck. I know I I know in my youth, I walked through forested area one time, and I literally my boot got stuck in deep snow, and I couldn't get my boot out. Literally had to hop out of the forest on one foot because I couldn't get my boot. Had I been wearing snowshoes, then it would have been a different story. So this was another way how Anishinaabe people used to get around. And most of the snowshoes were made out of ash wood. The reason for that is it's extremely pliable. You could bend it very easily. All you have to do is heat it and soak it in water. They would soak some of these pieces into a huge drum of heated water. And I already spoke earlier about these massive pottery pots that they were creating. So one could just imagine dipping the wood in that in heated water and then bending them and fabricating them. So again, there's a lot of science involved. This is a technology. There's an engineering involved here, and there's math. Because when you're stringing up these snowshoes, you have to be aware of the distance. You have to use mathematics here. Okay, it's not you just don't simply grab a twig from the forest and try to create a snowshoe out of it. There's a lot of process and thought involved in that. Okay, so those are one of the ways how Anishinaabe people used to travel in Upper and Lower Canada, the Sudbury region, Manitoulin Island, throughout Northern Ontario. That's how folks used to travel. And those are the different types of snowshoes there, and they're all labeled differently. So snowshoes are not only found amongst the Anishinaabe people, they're found amongst the Haudenosaunee, the Inuit, the Métis, different nations from Canada. They all have a form of snowshoe. Same with agriculture. I talked about agriculture earlier. The Haudenosaunee were heavily involved in agriculture as well, growing corn, beans, squash, tomatoes, potatoes, those sort of things. Okay, but today I'm talking about Anishinaabe because Science North is on Anishinaabe territory, and we're in the Anishinaabe territorial region. Next slide, please. The Ojibwe Bagatawe. Bagatawe is, in our language, lacrosse, hickory lacrosse sticks. So the first lacrosse sticks are made out of hickory. The term lacrosse is a French word. It literally means a cross. But we know lacrosse sticks are not a cross. But I guess that's the closest word that they could come up with to explain the Bagatawe. So Bagatawe is a lacrosse, a game that we play with a lacrosse stick. We'll call it a Bagatawe stick. And with a little ball. And most of you have seen hockey. It's quite similar to hockey, where you shoot a puck into a net. You use a lacrosse stick to shoot a ball into a net. There is a team, opposing teams, the team who scores the most goals. So one time I was at an elders conference in Peterborough, Ontario at Trenton University. There was an elder that talked about the snowshoe. And he said, centuries ago, the Ojibwe noticed the children playing a game with snowshoes. They would take their little snowshoes and they would roll up a ball and they would whip a ball around and they would try to catch the ball with their snowshoes. So one of the elders thought they'd have a good idea. Why don't we fabricate a stick where we can play? Instead of using your snowshoe, we'll create a stick. We'll call it the Bagatawe. And that's how the Bagatawe came to be. So every First Nations has their own story regarding lacrosse, the Bagatawe. Some call it the creator's game. So that's an Anishinaabe story. So it was an elder seeing children playing with their snowshoes, catching a ball. Later, they fabricated a lacrosse stick, a Bagatawe stick, and the game grew from there. That's the story I heard at Trenton University. So these are lacrosse sticks from the beginning to the modern context, right? So to the far left, you see the first lacrosse stick, how it changes over time. Interestingly, the First Nations that played lacrosse didn't have just one lacrosse stick. They had a lacrosse stick for the goalie, they had a lacrosse stick for a forward, a lacrosse stick for a defense person. So there was different types of lacrosse sticks as well in the beginning. This is just a picture of some of the samples of lacrosse sticks. Okay, so Anishinaabe people had a lot of leisure time and they would play lacrosse. Okay, next slide, please. This is an Ojibwe birch toboggan used to collect maple sap during sugar season for winter travel and later used for recreational activities. One of the first things that the French people utilized was the toboggan from the Anishinaabe people. So in Montreal, where you see a lot of the ski mountains now, during the early contact period, the French noticed the Anishinaabe were sliding down these massive hills on a toboggan. So it was kind of like their recreational activities. They were racing one another. So when the French first arrived, they started, for their leisure time, they started sliding down these massive hills today. These hills are now ski hills. Of course, I'm talking about an era before skis. They would use those same hills and slide down the hill and have all kinds of activities using the toboggan. But toboggan was initially made so folks can use it to travel during the winter. And I'll get to that later. But the toboggan was primarily used by the Anishinaabe, Ojibwe, Odawa, Potawatomi people to part of the maple sugaring harvest process. Next slide, please. So here's a picture, Ojibwe maple sugar camp, 1856. There was a report done in 1856, a governmental report, to see how the Anishinaabe people were living in the far north and to see whether or not the Europeans would be able to live in those areas too. So they came to study the north and they did a report in 1856. But the report also indicated through the Hudson's Bay archives that in one growing season, the Anishinaabe, Manitoulin, and Allen were producing 400,000 pounds of maple sugar in one season. That's amazing. Why would anybody want to produce 400,000 pounds of maple sugar? Well, it is 1856, and there's no white granulated sugar in Northern Ontario. The only sweetener would be brown sugar or maple, we call maple sugar. So that's why it was such a hot commodity, and it was great for economic, it was an economic way for the Anishinaabe to profit, right? So as the sketch shows, you can see a toboggan in the background of the sketch there against that lodge, and you can see snowshoes there as well. And in the background, you can see these massive, massive maple trees with containers hanging below them. So they're processing maple sugar. And these folks by the fire are cooking sap to a texture to make it either syrup, maple syrup, for your cornbread, or to make sugar in order to sell as part of economic activity. So as we can see, the Anishinaabe people are quite industrious. Folks for the longest time couldn't believe the Anishinaabe could produce 400,000 pounds of maple sugar because they didn't have the metal pots to do it. But as I indicated earlier, they did not require metal pots. They had these massive vessels we call pottery. And some of their surnames are Wabakike. So whoever's surname was Wabakike, they were the pottery maker in that community. For instance, Birch Island, Ontario, Whitefish, also known as Wawaskaniga. There's a lot of surnames there, Wabakike. So there must have been a clay mound near that area where folks were creating massive pottery pots. Again, this provides us a glimpse into the way the Anishinaabe people used to live. So as I indicated, they weren't simple hunter-gatherer societies. They were a lot more complex than that. They were involved in the sugaring industry as well. Next slide, please. Zizbakwit minwa nenatgo ziwagamede. So Zizbakwit in our language is sugar, minwa is and, nenatgo ziwagamede. So literally it means sugar and maple syrup. So my cousin Rosemary Shawanda and her husband Armando, they have a company, and they produce a lot of sugar. They produce a lot of syrup. So I just thought I'd put these here to show that In a modern context, we're still involved in processing sugar. We're still involved in producing sugar and maple syrup. And they sell those. They produce those in the spring, and they sell them shortly after they're produced and manufactured. Okay, again, so that's the Anishinaabe way of life, living off the land and producing, using these resources and creating an economic activity out of it. Okay, next slide, please. This is a toboggan, or a Joshduagan, Ojibwe technology and sled design for shock-absorbing rides. So as I indicated earlier, toboggans were used to move sugar from place to place in order to process. This type of toboggan was used for transportation. Okay, so part of this toboggan, it's a really indigenous ingenuity, you can say. They provided shock absorption, so you can see the shocks, literally see the shocks on the going across the sled, the front and back. So that provides shock absorption. So if you're going over rough terrain, the ride is not so rough. Kind of like the shocks you have in your automobile today. They created an Ojibwe design to ensure that the ride was softer. Next slide, please. The legend of Ojibwe John Beargrease in the annual dog sled marathon. 400-mile race at Minnesota honoring mail carrier. So the first mail carriers in the Great Lakes region on the American side were Ojibwe people, and they would deliver mail via dog sled and that sled we showed earlier. So John Beargrease was said to have been one of the quickest mail carriers in American history during that period. He delivered mail, he delivered all types of parcels and objects during that period. He was so proficient at it. They began to have races in his honor. So they used to have a 400-mile race at Minnesota honoring him. You can look that up on Google, have a look. You might even see some videos on Ojibwe dog sled teams. So this is how Ojibwe used to travel in the winter. Of course, the lakes were frozen, so you still have to travel. And as you can see, the individual with their snowshoes beside them. So they created their own technology for transportation. Important to know how the first settlers lived off the land and how they delivered their mail. Next slide, please. So this is a Goneganebek, a Tadiwan, a snow snake game. So initially, folks used to ice fish in the winter. In order to communicate with one another, they would create a snow snake and throw it across the lake. And they would attach a message to the snow snake and let the folks know we're finished ice fishing for the day, we're going to leave soon. And then they would throw that across the lake. Rather than walk half a mile or a mile across the lake, you would throw a snow snake across the lake. So the snow snakes are initially a form of a communication device. So later on, the snow snakes were used as a winter game, and they gambled and they see who could build the most sturdy snow snake and throw it across the ice. But initially, they were communication devices. But later, they became snow snake games. Some of these snow snakes were found at Obijwang Lake, Lake Wolsey on Manitoulin Island in the earlier period. If you could, next slide, please. We'll look at a brief video clip. So these are students enjoying a snow snake game outside. They created a little pathway to throw the snake. In the competition, there's math involved. You do measurement to see who throws the snow snake the furthest. So the Anishinaabe people not only had games like lacrosse in the summer, but they also had games in the winter. Okay, good to know. Next slide, please. Wampum as hypertext. So today we know hypertext as HTML. That's coding your computers. So the Anishinaabe people and the Haudenosaunee were involved in coding. They were the first coders in North America. They used wampum as hypertext. Today being Treaty Recognition Week, Wampums were used as formal agreements between First Nations or between First Nations and first settlers. So wampum was extremely important. Those solidified agreements, they were legally used and they were binding agreements. So today, a lot of the treaties, they're in the courts. Governments are not honoring them, but the treaties were extremely important to First Nations people. So again, I provided information there, academic articles on wampum as hypertext, HTML. The first HTML encoding in North America was done by First Nations people using wampum shells, wampum beads, and creating these intricate wampum belts. Next slide, please. Ojibwe Toboggan. So in the winter, in order to be comfortable, you don't want to be cold outside, they would make these coats out of deer hide, elk, or sometimes moose. Some of them are quite fashionable. They would use designs in the front of the coat. So again, you know, folks taking full advantage of their natural environment. When you harvest a deer, you don't just throw away the hide, you create a coat out of it. So you use every part of the animal when you go hunting. Next slide, please. These are Ojibwe and Minjikening. Minjikening is our word for mitts. Again, these are made out of deer hide, elk, moose, rabbit fur, beaver fur at the end. Nice designs using shells, using beads. Initial beadwork was done by using shells, later glass beads. Next slide, please. These are Ojibwe moccasin, a shoe. So a moccasin literally means a shoe. It's an Ojibwe word for shoe, moccasin. So they would create moccasins for summer, for the fall, for the winter, for the spring. Some of them would be waterproof. Okay, very comfortable when you put rabbit fur on the inside. Keeps you snug, nice and warm, nice and soft. Next slide, please. This is a tickle noggin. Was used to care for the baby while the parents were working. So I'll show you a video clip of this. Next slide, please. So this is Olivia Poole, an Ojibwe woman that invented the baby jolly jumper in 1954. Was one of Canada's first women to get a patent and garner worldwide recognition. So the volume isn't working. Maybe if you could turn it up. So this is Olivia Poole. She's an Ojibwe woman. She invented the jolly jumper using the tickle noggin, a cradle board. So she took the technology from a cradle board and created a tickle noggin. So a tickle noggin cared for the baby in a very safe way, kind of like how you could strap children into a car seat. Later, she took the tickle noggin technology and created a jolly jumper out of it. So she's one of the first women to get a patent. We're extremely proud of her using traditional technology and bringing it into a modern context. So that's Olivia Poole. You can research her online and find out more about Olivia Poole. You can even have a look at this video clip online. We're not getting the full volume there, but I just wanted to share it to let you know that Anishinaabe people, First Nations people, Ojibwe people have been contributing to the world that we currently live in all along the way. So this also transformed parenthood, where the women in the modern era were allowed to tend to other activities while children were in a jolly jumper. Okay, next slide, please. This is the comiccon High School robotics team. Again, Anishinaabe students, they're not stuck in time. They're really involved in complex coding, programming, involved in science. Initially, the comiccon High School partnered up with area high schools in order to learn how to be proficient at robotics and go to robotics competitions. They became extremely good at it. They started winning competitions in North Bay, Southern Ontario, that sort of thing, or placing in those competitions. They were invited to go take part in the World Robotics Championships in Detroit. and at Detroit they won this banner. So they did exceptionally well for a small little high school. So again, this is just evidence of Anishinaabe people. As Olivia Poole earlier, inventing the Jolly Jumper, using STEM for that. And in a modern context, we have a high school robotics team here, really successful at science, technology, engineering, and math. Next slide, please. So this is a robot program to shoot basketball hoops. They created this during the Toronto Raptors run to the World Championships, NBA Championships. So the comiccon high school students created their own robot, programmed their own robot, and coded their robot to shoot basketball hoops. So if you could, next slide, so it goes off. So there you go. Oh, and it shot a basket. If you could go back one, maybe one slide, move forward again. One more. There you go. Anyhow, it's a video clip of students creating a robot. This is in their gymnasium, and the robot is shooting basketball hoops. So these are the students that went to the World Robotics Championships, and they're all Ojibwe students, Ojibwe, Odawa, Potawatomi students from the Comiccon High School. So we look at science all along the way to the current context. And I also wanted to share with you an Indigenous man who's also connected with the Comiccon robotics team. His name is Aaron Yazzie. Next slide, please. So Aaron Yazzie is a Navajo mechanical engineer. He works at NASA, and he was involved in fabricating and creating tool bits for the Mars Rover Perseverance that landed on Mars. So last summer in August 2020, the spaceship was launched in the United States, and it flew from August 2020 till around February 2021, and it landed on Mars. And when it landed on Mars, Aaron Yazzie, a Navajo mechanical engineer, was involved in navigating the rover from Pasadena, California. So this is Indigenous ingenuity. Aaron Yazzie was highly involved in designing the rover and highly involved in ensuring that the rover does its job while on Mars, and as well as using the technology that Aaron Yazzie created. And that technology was taken on that spaceship. And parachute landed on Mars, and that Mars rover is currently on Mars, the Perseverance, and Aaron Yazzie was heavily involved in that. Next slide, please. So this is a video clip of Aaron Yazzie, Navajo mechanical engineer, who also has connections with the Comiccon robotics team. They've connected on Twitter. And he's involved in supporting a lot of Indigenous STEM throughout the United States as well as Canada. We're very privileged for Chris Mera, a science teacher from the Comiccon High School, to be able to connect with Aaron Yazzie on Twitter. So this is Aaron Yazzie. He's talking about the Mars landing. Again, the video clip doesn't have any sounds, but he is connecting with the national news media in the United States, and he's sharing his involvement on how the rover is landing on Mars and how they're using his technology, his indigenous knowledge, his indigenous technology on Mars. And they're going to get some soil and some rock samples from Mars. And the students asked them how long would it take for that rock sample and that soil to come back to Earth. The students thought that they would be able to get samples of the rock and Earth back to Earth in like 2 months. His answer was 10 years. So it's a long scientific journey, but it's great to see the indigenous mechanical engineer involved in exploring Mars and involved in bringing science science and information back to Earth. So, as my presentation talked about, we've covered an extremely lengthy period of time in history there. But my primary aim during this presentation is to share with you Indigenous STEM, Indigenous knowledge, an Indigenous contribution to the world towards science, technology, engineering, and math. And I think for classroom teachers, we have to really incorporate and ensure that we teach a lot of this positive narrative in our daily lesson planning. Because sometimes we don't do justice. Some of you are doing extremely great work at covering Indigenous positive content. Content knowledge is important, but we also need to ensure that for those that are not teaching this, please look at this video and begin to plan out some ideas and strategically plan, and to ensure to integrate this into the classroom, because students need to learn more about Indigenous knowledge and the Indigenous contribution to science, technology, engineering, and math. Without that innovation and that ingenuity, we won't be where we are today. Again, with all the food that we're eating, I haven't even covered medicine or pharmacology or pharmacopoeia here, but probably 80% of the drugs and medicines you get in pharmacies, 80% of that is Indigenous knowledge from the Americas. So those are the contributions that we need to add to the classroom. Okay, next slide, please. So Miigwech, thank you so much. It's been an honor and a privilege to present with you alongside with Science North and Matthew here, my friend. We're really pleased and honored to present to you and to share this really important knowledge. It is Treaty Recognition Week. In order to better understand treaties, it's also good to understand the true narrative behind Indigenous people. Who are these people? We need to really understand them, because when they created treaties, they had a full understanding what those were about, because they fully understood science, technology, engineering, and math. The Wampum Belt is a highly political piece of document. To us, that's a binding document when you have wampum with a treaty agreement. Okay? So Indigenous people were not simple hunters and gatherers that needed to be civilized by the modern settlers. Modernity comes by including Indigenous knowledge into the way we live today. We would not have modernity in the Americas or Canada without First Nations people. So we need to give thanks for all their knowledge on plant science, all their knowledge on technology, engineering, and math, everything they've done so far, and everything they continue to do. Aaron Yazzie is controlling a robot from Pasadena, California, a robot that took from August to February to land on another planet. He's controlling it from California. Isn't that amazing? That's Indigenous contribution to the world we live in. And I thank Science North for giving me the opportunity to share this positive narrative and to share this important information. So thank you so much. Miigwech.
Miigwech, Dominic. It was wonderful to listen to your wonderful presentation, and we have so many great comments from people that were tuning in. If you're interested, we can take a few questions.
Sure, no problem.
Okay,
absolutely. That would be great.
This is great, and looks like we have people joining us from all over. We have from Callender to Elliott Lake, Maple Ridge. Yeah, it's amazing. Oh, near Ottawa. So let's see.
Hey, everybody. Great to have you here today.
Oh, up around Pick River, Thunder Bay.
I'm so glad you could engage in learning today with myself and Matthew.
Absolutely. I need to Big Tegong Anishinaabe, Pick River. Let's see if we can find maybe if you would like. Here's a question. Lainey is just wondering, how the snowshoes let you walk on the snow.
Okay, so in the winter in Northern Ontario or anywhere in Northern Canada, when it snows overnight, there's a lot of powdery snow, and sometimes it snows all night, and you have 2 or 3 feet of snow, and you try to walk through the forest, maybe to get to somebody's house or your neighbor's house. Your feet are gonna sink right through the snow. In fact, your feet might even get stuck in there, or you might lose your shoe in that snow. However, the Anishinaabe created this technology where you put a snowshoe on your foot. So the snowshoe is a lot wider than your foot and a lot longer. So because of that platform, it creates like a buoyancy effect. It holds you up above the snow. So it helps you walk on top of the snow and pack it down as you're going. And over time, you go back and forth, you're creating a trail on the snow. So it helps you, it's part of our transportation in the winter during the contact period. But today, people use it for recreation and leisure. What a great way to exercise in the winter, especially during pandemic, when a lot of the classroom learning is being taken outside, outdoors. We purchased a couple of sets of snowshoes at the school I was working at last year at St. James in Lively, Ontario, with the Sudbury Catholic District School Board. We had snowshoes, and we took them outside, and we were walking on top of the snow. Good question.
Absolutely, and if you want to test that out, if you're ever in the Sudbury area and Chwacomoc area, and you come into our science center, you can lay on our bed of nails and see how surface area really contributes to that type of flotation buoyancy that Dominic is talking about. We will do, I'm being conscious of the time. We have a question here that I think is quite interesting, and it's from Colton. Wondering, how did people determine how they would make maple syrup?
Well, maple syrup is a really complex process. So there's a lot of preparation involved. You would make these little containers to collect the sap. You would create these little wedges for the spout for the sap. Then you would use these massive pottery pots, create a little a maple sugar hut with a fire. You would prepare the syrup, pour the sap into the pots. You would allow it to boil, and over time, it would turn into a syrup. Or if you cook it even longer, it turns into sugar. You would put a little wedge into a tree. So probably in March, when it begins to thaw, and the trees begin to thaw as well. So the trees are frozen in the winter, and when they begin to thaw, all the juices of the trees coming back to life, all the chemical reactions happening, create this sap, create this water inside the tree. So we would put a little spout on it, and if it begins to run sap water, it's that time of the year where the sap is beginning to run. So a lot of the times the sap only runs during the day. It doesn't run in the evening, because in the evening it gets below zero, so things begin to freeze again. So it's not running during the night. So the next day, when the sun is out again, the sun is beaming its warm light on the trees. It begins to melt the tree again, and it's above plus 0 degrees. So 0 degrees is freezing, +1, +2, +3. Maybe it's +6 outside, and the sap is running really well, right? So those are the times when you begin to tap those trees. And it's only a certain time of the year. It's not gonna run sap towards late spring, because now the water and all the juices are needed for that tree to grow buds and leaves and begin to flourish. Because it's a living thing, and we're just tapping it for its resources, right? We're actually making it healthier when we're tapping it. It allows it to grow, the leaves to become even denser. So without that process, the tree's not as vibrant, right? So again, when we're looking at stewardship, we're taking care. Important thing, always put tobacco down when you're harvesting indigenous food, or when you're harvesting anything to do with fish or plants. You always put tobacco down and have respect, because we believe in taking care of everything on Mother Earth. Good question.
Miigwech, Dom. Well, as I see, we've exceeded a little bit of our time, and that's excellent. I'm really happy to
I
have
can take a couple of more questions if there's any more questions there.
Well, let's have a look. So we have a question on Anishinaabe relationships with with dogs and dog sledding.
Okay, it's a good question too. So in the earlier period, as I showed in the video, John Beaudry was a well-known mail carrier in the Minnesota region. So during the contact period, that's how a lot of Anishinaabe people traveled. Because of new technology, you know, it's with snowmobiles and automobiles and that sort of thing, you don't see too much of it. But if one goes to the far north, you still see a lot of dog teams amongst the Inuit, at least before the snowmobile is becomes more prevalent up there. And so you still see a lot of that type of traditional activity, that type of traditional transportation. So that's how the Anishinaabe people used to travel in the winter months, using dog sled over trails. So if you go over a certain period so many times, you begin to create winter roads. And of course, they would travel over the ice, over the icy sections there. So there's quite a few Disney movies now regarding mail carriers in the far north. Too bad it wasn't an Inuit person. I think it was not an Indigenous person, but they created a movie about a mail carrier. It was a Disney movie. I forget the title now. But that's how folks used to travel. And that's how folks used to communicate. And that's how they used to carry mail. And those snow snakes too, that was a form of communication. You would throw those snow snakes across the ice. Instead of walking across the ice for 2 miles or 1 mile, you would throw a snow snake with a message on it. So that was a form of communication before cell phones.
That's excellent. Miigwech for sharing that. We have so many people tuning in from so many places, and so many thank yous to Miigweches coming your way. Some even expressing they're excited to hopefully have a chance to learn more about traditional medicines, Mishkeke, and so that's
my daughter Melissa is a medical doctor. She studied at McMaster University, and one of the courses she took was pharmacopoeia, and she learned that probably anywhere from 60 to 80% of the medicine that you get in your pharmacies today are indigenous pharmacopoeia from the Americas, from indigenous people. Like something like aspirin you get from a willow tree, right? So we know those things, but there's a lot more complex types of medicines that were initially Anishinaabe medicines. So really important. That could be a next topic discussion. Maybe you could invite my daughter to present. She's the doctor.
amazing. And actually, Mandad. So this is here we have. So we have another question, but we have someone from Regina, Saskatchewan, tuning in. So we've gone all the way.
Regina, Saskatchewan.
How amazing is that? So we have a question on how many things can you make snowshoes out of? So looking at the types of materials that are used.
Well, today you see a very little tree diversity. Yeah. So if you were to go out today, you would probably look for what you have in your region, right? So in the slideshow, I provided the different varieties of trees that you can use, right? So as long as it's hardwood, as long as it's pliable, as long as it could be heated, dipped into water and bended, right? So it's got to be pliable, right? So there's a science to that. There's technology, engineering, and math, right? So yeah, there's many different types of woods. So as I indicated, I'm just talking about from an Anishinaabe perspective here on the Great Lakes region. If you were to go like to Inuit territory or you go to Saskatchewan, there's different types of trees and tree species there. So you would use whichever one is not. It's going to be solid. It's going to be bendable, and it's not going to crack in the winter months when you need it the most. So there's a science to that. They know exactly what type of tree that you're going to use. But today, with so little tree diversity, it's becoming harder and harder to ensure. There's a lot of the trees that are probably used. They might not last in the winter, cold weather time. They might crack. So, good question. So it depends on the variety of tree in your region, and there's so many varieties of snowshoes across Canada. I'm just talking about the ones from our region here.
Miigwech for sharing. Let's see. I believe we went through all of our questions. Are there any last thoughts that you have on kind of next steps, and for those educators who may want to continue to learn more and share this incredible knowledge?
Well, I think you can start by sharing this video with the students, and Science North is going to have it on their website for the next little while. I think share the video and use the video as a springboard. So I'm not talking about everything about Anishinaabe people here. We were time travelers, and we went back to 2500 BC. So I selectively chose. So it's up to you as a classroom teacher, but make sure it's positive, because we want to be able to teach all the students in our classroom. So if you're going to talk about an indigenous teaching, make sure it's a positive narrative. That's not to say don't teach about residential schools or those stories that are very difficult, but interweave positive stories when you cover those topic areas. So when they leave the classroom, they feel happy, they feel proud. A student should never leave a classroom feeling really down about something they learned in the classroom. They should leave the classroom feeling like they're 10 times bigger and they're stronger and they're so proud of who they are. And I think we need to do more of that for our Indigenous students, because a lot of times we focus on all the positive contributions of the founding nations, they say, so-called founding nations, the French and the English, although they're settlers themselves. But we need to focus on the contributions of Indigenous people. Like Olivia Poole invented the Jolly Jumper using the tickle noggin technology. Remembrance Day is coming up. Think about all the Ojibwe veterans and Ojibwe or First Nations war heroes like Tommy Prince, right? The most decorated veterans from World War I and World War II. Francis Peggy-Magabo, the most decorated war veteran from World War I. Tommy Prince, the most decorated war veteran from World War II. Of any soldier, right? We know very little bit about that. It's time we begin to share those positive narratives. Jim Thorpe was the first president of the National Football League in the United States. Anishinaabe man, the first president of the NFL. No word of him. No word about him during the Super Bowl. So we need to stop erasing Indigenous contribution and elevating it, because we should all be proud of who we are. Indigenous people are part of the fabric of the communities that we live in, and it's time we start looking at all their positive contributions, right? Those are my final thoughts. Make education positive for all learners. Doesn't matter what background they are. Start including positive Indigenous narrative, and sharing this video would be a nice start. Kitche, miigwech, kinawaya, upjingitchinendam, kinagi bizindaj gaik mamping gitchinendam ganigi tabatama, maba Anishinaabe abajimadzit, mina abajik chinatamaget gawi, kinawaya, wimnamadzit mampi, Anishinaabe king. Naha giget, miigwech.
Miigwech, Dom, and very appreciated for your time and everyone who's listened in. We're excited to continue these types of discussions, and for those of you living in the Thunder Bay region, Indigenous Ingenuity is actually making its way to you. It will be there starting in December of this year, and so it will be at the Thunder Bay Art Gallery. So please be sure to go and visit and engage with the Indigenous content that is there. And again, miigwech, everyone. It's been a wonderful way to kick off Friday, and hopefully we will see you again soon. And Mama P, Minwa Kwa Min.
Mama P, kinawaya. Mama P.